The Auburn coaching search. I talked to a lot of people about this yesterday, a few more this morning, trying to get as good a feel on this and a gauge on this as I can. The first thing I've picked up on, though, is there's a massive disconnect, in my humble opinion, between the reality and the perception of the quality of the Auburn job. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I've already gone over it, but just to quickly reiterate, I've found that in the regular fanosphere, if you will, people who haven't been privy to the inner workings of Auburn perceive it as a second-class job. They perceive it as a dead-end job. That is not what Auburn is at all. And please don't misunderstand me when I say that's not just me talking. That is the opinion of a lot of people within the coaching industry, the agent industry. They understand what Auburn could be. I think John Cohen, the new AD there, obviously understands what Auburn could be. That's why he came there. I think he's going to do a heck of a job packaging that and selling that vision. And it's not too hard. Did you check out their game last week? Hey, they're going to play Western Kentucky this week, where they're only favored by 5, by the way. Check that game out, too. You'll have passion oozing out of Auburn in all directions, and it's obvious the passion's there, but also the infrastructure's there, and it hasn't been in the past. So anyway, with that out of the way, I'm just saying that to make you understand there aren't very many guys out there who, if offered the Auburn job, are turning it down because you can't win there. They may have their own reasons. They may be happy where they are. They may not like the SEC, whatever. But they're not turning it down because Auburn doesn't offer everything it takes to win. And they haven't in the past necessarily recently, but they will in the future. We've already gone over that. NIL's there. Facilities now, as of about 5 minutes ago, are there. I think the transfer portal is going to be very kind to Auburn if they get the right guys. So where are we standing right now? I know Lane Kiffin is the hot name. Shirt got a little tangled there, sorry. I know Lane Kiffin's the hot name in this whole thing. I agree with that. So that's legitimate smoke. If I had to just guess today on who Auburn's head coach will be week 1 of next year, I guess my guess would be Lane Kiffin. Several things to keep in mind here. We've seen coaching searches play out before. You and I have both been through these before. Intel on a coaching search can be both legitimate and incomplete. And what I mean by that is you've obviously got the Auburn side of the coaching search, and then you've got the side of a coaching search that is the candidates. And let's say there are 4 candidates that are involved heavily, and no one from the Auburn side is talking, and only 1 or 2 of the candidates are willing to talk. Only 1 or 2 of the candidates have loose lips in their camp. Well, there could be some legitimate information coming out from the candidate that in reality is running number 3 in the pecking order. But since there is a precious lack of information out there and the camp of candidate number 3 is the one talking, all of a sudden, candidate number 3 sounds very viable. Unbeknownst to everyone, maybe even including those in that camp, that's not the first choice. But you don't know that because no one at Auburn's talking. And I'm speaking generically here. I'm just giving you a little cautionary tale, how these things have played out in the past, and how you know that feeling like I do when you wake up one morning and someone has made a hire and it's not the guy you thought it was going to be. That's one potential reason why you get shocked and misled, and some people are made fools of. That's why I very, very much steer clear of the definitive statement when we're talking about coaching searches. Number 2, candidates do not always know which other candidates are in play. This is a case-by-case basis because sometimes agents are representing multiple candidates that are up for the same job. Jimmy Sexton represents Lane Kiffin. Jimmy Sexton represents about 80% of the sport and candidates that would even vie for this job. So that's not out of the realm of possibility, but case by case, of course, there are some times where I'm up for the job and you're up for the job and we don't even know that the other is in play. Like I said about LSU, no one knew Brian Kelly was up for that job. At least no one who was talking knew that Brian Kelly was up for that job until he got hired. And so you probably had some folks feeling pretty confident about their chances of landing that job right up until they didn't get it. And all of a sudden they say, they hired who? Kelly? And then they call their agent. How come you didn't tell me Kelly was in the mix for this? And the agent says, I didn't know. Or agent probably lies, but the agent probably says, I didn't know. Or we just found out too late. So that's another thing to think about. Number 3, and this is where I'm cautious Every bit of intel I've gotten suggests that the Lane Kiffin Auburn stuff is real. But there's always a caveat on this. Why are rumors allowed to persist? Kiffin hasn't shot it down. Auburn hasn't shot it down. Ole Miss hasn't shot it down. I've seen this happen before. Again, to be clear, I think it's legitimate and have reason to think that. But we've seen times before where there is a prevailing rumor out there about a certain candidate and a certain job, and no one shoots it down. And what does the common mind take no one shooting it down to mean? The common mind thinks, well, that means it must be true. If it wasn't true, people would shoot it down. Sometimes maybe so. Might I suggest to you there are also two other possibilities. Sometimes it's a very convenient smokescreen. If I'm John Cohen and I have no interest in hiring Lane Kiffin, but everyone thinks I'm going to, keep talking as much as you want to, because you're providing a lot of smoke and a lot of haze over the process. Meanwhile, I've interviewed 4 other candidates and you haven't spoken their name because you're focused on one guy. That's convenient for me. So one of the reasons that those rumors are allowed to persist is because they serve as a perfect smokescreen. What do we also know to be true? Another reason why rumors persist sometimes is because that candidate has representation using those rumors that aren't being shot down as leverage against their current employer. Now, none of that I know to be happening in this particular case. I'm just saying we've seen folks get burned by it in the past. Maybe you've been burned by it in the past. Maybe I've been burned by it in the past thinking I know one thing when in reality it was another thing. So I just want to say, again, I think Kiffin in Auburn is legit. I think he's the leading candidate. I have no reason not to believe that. But I do have every reason to be guarded and careful about this. And the other thing I would encourage you to keep in mind is I know you have a thirst for information every hour. But the reality is there is not new information to be had in coaching searches every hour. So the thirst may be 24/7, no pun intended. The information is not that plentiful. And this is where folks in our industry sometimes end up losing some credibility because you just make stuff up, which is what we're not going to do. But absent some new intel, what do? Well, you just go put your 47th hot board out there, and because you know it would generate some traffic, you just add a couple of names on there. Why? Because your cousin texted you about them a few hours ago. In reality, they're not in play, but, oh well, I'm not saying they're going to get hired. I'm just saying they're candidates. Just be careful with that. Just because someone's not giving you new information every 5 minutes doesn't mean they're not plugged in. Actually, it's quite the opposite. If you want to know the hallmark of someone who's pretty plugged in on these things, they don't give you a ton of updates. If the fact is Auburn's going to hire someone after the end of the regular season, what's going to change in the next 48 hours? What's going to change in the next 72 hours? Now, I'll tell you where it gets really interesting, and you will never get a peek behind the curtain on this. And I have been able to get somewhat of a peek, but you're never allowed to tell the stories, which sucks. Maybe one day when someone retires, they'll free us up to tell the stories. But what's the most interesting about coaching searches is when a head coach, via back channels, has agreed in principle to become the head coach somewhere, and they start constructing their staff, also via back channels, that would fascinate you. That would be worth its own Netflix special. Because that, to me, if you were to really see the sausage get made, that would be more intriguing than the process that leads up to the head coach being hired. Because that's pretty straightforward. You can imagine how that happens. I think the process of putting a staff together would be a little more interesting. And then, when you decide on your DFO or director of player personnel, and then those people have to go tell their current employer, sometimes out of the blue, in the heart of recruiting season, hey, I'm out. It's not easy. Those conversations are not easy. Oftentimes, they're also taking other folks with them, and it can be very uncomfortable, as you can imagine. So if it does come down to Ole Miss and Auburn, let's just circle back to this as we wrap this up. If it does come down to Lane Kiffin being the guy, the number one candidate, and hypothetically, it is him looking at an offer from Auburn versus a fresh offer from Ole Miss. One of the things that I've been told consistently over the past month is facilities edge Auburn, and that's not a shock to anyone. Money, edge Auburn. That's not a shock to anyone. If it comes down to either of those things, you're choosing Auburn. There's an edge Auburn has here that hardly anyone I have heard has spoken about. And it comes down to state law. That guy right there wants what any coach wants. He wants the long-term deal. He wants the 10-year, lifetime-changing deal that Jimbo has and that a lot of his peers have. You can't have it in Mississippi. And it's not Ole Miss's fault. It's not Mississippi State's fault. It is state law. Those employees, those state employees, cannot get contracts past, I think it's either 4 or 4.5 years. Now, you can talk all you want to about how, well, there could be special carve-outs and special referendums. Not like they could do legally at Auburn or any of a number of other institutions. Auburn can offer them a 10-year deal tomorrow if they wanted to. Ole Miss cannot do that. And so they're playing the game with one hand tied behind their back already, and there may be a few fingers on the other hand tied behind their back. That matters. I've been consistently told that matters in this whole thing, so just keep an eye on that. Guys, thanks for watching Late Kick. Make sure and leave a comment. I love interacting with you. But most of all, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That's how we keep all of this free.